There's no business like show business.
All righty, let's talk about death and dying today. Welcome, gyno-curious listeners. I am Dr. Amy Novat. We are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. I am so pleased to welcome Barbara Sarah to the studio this morning. Following a breast cancer diagnosis in 1992, Barbara left a 20-year career as a school social worker on Long Island and chose to dedicate herself to work in oncology. For 2 decades, she was the director of the Oncology Support Program at Health Alliance in Kingston, New York. And then about 10 years ago, she co-founded the nonprofit organization Circle of Friends for the Dying, and in 2022 helped found the Circle Home for the Dying, the first of its kind in the Mid-Hudson Valley. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to. First, clearly working with women with cancer, and perhaps your own experience with breast cancer, had to have provoked you to thinking about dying and death. What would you say were the most lasting lessons patients and maybe your own diagnosis taught you about these subjects?
Life happens and life matters. So that one of the things I actually do at Circle Home is that I'm running a group called Life Matters, where even in a home for the dying, we talk about issues related to life, to music, to theater, to relationships. Life is important.
It's remarkable how often most of us living forget it or move through our days with perhaps just a disrespect or an avoidance of the reality of our death, right?
If you were in my shoes, which are very big, you would find that I think about it a lot. And many of the things I do are related to the fact that I am 86 years old. I never expected to live this long. My parents died in their 60s, but I just keep going. Yeah. And I want to think one of the reasons that's the case is that I keep my spirit up about life.
What does spirit about life mean to you? It means different things. What would you say that means?
Good question. It means being open to what comes my way, to the people who come my way, to the opportunities that cross my path. Even walking in the street now, I'm one of those old ladies who stops and talks to kids. It's great. It's great. And I find that there are many young children who aren't accustomed to talking to older people with gray hair. If their grandma ties her hair, they may not know that people get gray hair. So I'm highly spirited in my life, and it's been a pleasure.
It's about receptivity, isn't it? It's about an open heart, an open mind, a willingness to continue to learn and embrace even a world that seems incredibly challenging, as certainly today's world is extremely challenging. For some folks, talking about death and dying is an extremely challenging conversation. Have you always felt comfortable discussing these issues, or have you developed a sort of muscle around this conversation that's improved over time?
I would say I've grown into it because my first career was working in a high school, and I loved teenagers, and I did a lot of wonderful work in the high school. As a social worker, I had an improvisational theater group. I also was very engaged in helping kids live meaningful lives. After breast cancer, I became much more interested in what was going on in my life and in my body. And I wound up moving to upstate New York, if this is upstate. And fortunately, there was a job that I was well suited for to take over an oncology support program at the hospital in Kingston. And I did that for 20 years and used the creativity that I used with the kids in the high school with the job at the hospital, including an improvisational theater group, which I had in the high school and which I also did for cancer patients.
It's remarkable how often I hear from people who help others heal how important creativity is in that process. And creativity comes in a lot of forms and fashions. And I'm so grateful to hear that you found your venue, your voice, your way in which to express your own creativity and to help those who are healing, dealing with cancer diagnoses, for example, find a conduit to health through creativity and other means, for sure. You know, it's remarkable as we start to talk about this, I realized that in medical school, even in my residency, there was never a formal, perhaps not even informal conversations about how it felt to lose a patient, to watch someone die. And it's kind of remarkable because if you are a clinician of any sort dealing with patients in hospitals, inevitably you're going to experience someone dying or death. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, do you know offhand whether there's any more formal education going on in like nursing schools or mid-level education about dying and death?
I believe it's becoming quite important in medical school. It's the inevitable. Of course, it's always been the inevitable.
It has, but in medical school, the focus is always on how do we prevent illness? How do we prevent that inevitable? So it was always about putting up the boundaries and talking about the process by which you are going to avoid that. But as you know, you've pointed out, and we all know, it is inevitable. So it's rather uncanny that there isn't an opportunity, because it's not just about how difficult it is to watch someone pass, but the reverberations of that and how we personalize it, right? Because I don't know anyone who doesn't go to a memorial service who doesn't ask themselves, what will my memorial service look like? What is my legacy, right?
I've already had 2 meetings with my funeral director.
Tell us about that.
Well, because I know there's a wonderful woman who helps us run our death cafes. I haven't spoken about that yet. But Jo is a funeral director up in Albany, and she's a friend. And I decided I wanted to have some idea what my funeral was going to be like, since I'm not going to be there. So it would be wonderful to have a plan about how can we make this a meaningful event for the people who come, who are also going to die at some point.
That's empathic and generous of you. It is, because, listen, there are people who are proactive and plan their funerals, but they don't always think about how others are going to engage in it vis-a-vis their own imminent deaths. And it's funny, just recently I've heard from 2 different people that they're going to have a memorial service while they're still alive.
Yes. It's the latest thing. Have a party before you go, since you're not going to be there.
That's right. Well, if you people are, we all need affirmation even to the very, very end,
Why
right?
not? Yes.
Right. So can you talk to us about Circle of Friends for the Dying? How did that come about?
Oh, wow. Circle of Friends for the Dying was an organization that started about 12 years ago, where we had heard about, we felt, I don't know who we was, there were a number of us from different parts of the medical and healthcare community who wanted to be more open and honest about healthcare and where people can get good care. And you can't look at that subject without looking at what happens at the end. So we began to have meetings to talk about death, and that became 12 years ago a program that we have on a regular basis called the Death Cafe. Death cafes were, in the beginning, for the first 10 years, were held in person, where people would come together and have a conversation about death. And now our Circle of Friends for the Dying has a Death Cafe every month on the 18th of the month. And people call in and we form small groups and we have conversations. And there are some of us from the organization who lead these groups, 4 or 5 people at the most. And we talk about, by the way, we now have people coming from all over the world.
That's what I was going to ask. Who are these people who are participating?
Well, right now we have a young man from Mexico City who came last week, and we have a young woman from China who now comes on a regular basis.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
And of course, people from around the country come. We have an average of 25 people every month coming to talk about their experience with death, their concerns about how do you prepare for dying. It's been very exciting.
Oh, it's thrilling that you can expand the community, but also that clearly people want to learn more about this. Was there a template of this kind of organization before you guys founded the Circle?
Death Cafe was started, I think, about 20 years ago by a Frenchman, but it has grown. It's now international.
Oh,
there are
great.
death cafes, and you can go to deathcafe.com
Okay.
and look up, see where there are either in-person death cafes or Zoom ones since the pandemic. But we started our death cafe right in a coffee shop in Kingston. And now we do it online as well as in person. I do death cafes at a place in Kingston called People's Place. I also do them at Woodland Pond in New Paltz. If anybody wants to talk about death, I show up.
Great. I was thinking about the cafe. I was thinking about the home that we're going to talk about in a moment. And I was just curious, having spent my career working in hospitals, I was curious about where people die. And in the first half of the 20th century, most people died at home. And then more and more patients died in the hospital or nursing home facilities. And only over the last few years have the numbers of people dying at home increased again, but still less than in Canada, England, other countries. So I guess let's start with just talk about what the Circle Home for the Dying is. And then I want to just segue into, why are people reluctant to die at home? Or why are people anxious to die at home? So let's start with what the Circle of Home for the Dying is first.
The Circle of Friends for the Dying, our mission when we began was to develop a home because we had learned, thanks to a member of our committee, Elise Lark, she had been in touch with these comfort care homes around New York State. There's a group of them, but there was nothing in the Hudson Valley. And so Elise, who was a social worker who had worked with me at Oncology Support, she organized a group of us to come together to create a home in our area. And it was actually just a few months ago that we opened our doors. It took, and that's because a wonderful man who was a patient at the Oncology Support Program, he loved so much what we were doing and appreciated the opportunity that people would have a place where they could die. He decided that when he died, he would give us his home.
Wow.
And he died, as we all do. He gave us this beautiful house in Kingston in the Roundout, and that has been renovated now into Circle Home, which is a place that can take care of, for the last 3 months of their life, two people at a time.
Now, people have heard of palliative care and hospice. Is this the same thing?
People who are admitted to our home come through hospice. As a matter of fact, the first man who came to our home at the beginning of this year was living in a homeless shelter. And hospice was able to offer him care and bring him to our home, where he died a few weeks later, actually. But it's a place, Circle Home is a place where people who have the fewest resources and who don't have family around them, a beautiful place where they can die.
So you just pointed out the answer to a question I was going to ask in terms of what people are are lucky enough to come to this home. And I think it also answers why some people don't die at home, because they may not have a home. They may not have resources like family
That's
or
right.
friends
Right.
or financial resources to provide them the comfort they need outside of a hospital setting.
Let me tell you, as at the moment, it's what we've learned. There are other homes like this further upstate. We are the first home of its kind in the Hudson Valley. But what we've learned, it is very hard to keep financially to keep this going. These are the people we take care of cannot afford personal care. And we right now we've already had 4 people at the house, and we're on a pause period because we need to recruit more volunteers. We can't keep paying people to help us take care of the patients. So this is a very difficult time, especially now with some of the financial issues, for us to be able to afford to pay volunteer. They're not volunteers. We're now figuring out ways to get more money and find people who are willing to support what we're doing.
And it's not, money is always an obstacle for so many organizations and missions. But I would imagine there also may be, but correct me if I'm wrong, is there a paucity of people who want to do this kind of work? Or do you have an abundance of folks who are interested? Because talking about death and dying is hard, but being at a bedside is even harder.
And we train people how to do what they need to do, but it's not something that the ordinary person knows how to do. We're going through a period of growth. There are about 25 or more of these homes further upstate. They're doing all right, and we're learning.
Yeah. It strikes me we've become a community, a country perhaps, who has distanced itself from the rituals around dying and death. And as a result, so few people are able to talk about it, process it, and particularly as a community. So I love thinking about how these organizations that you're speaking about this morning are demanding that we talk about it as individuals and as communities.
What I've taken on as my specific challenge is talking to people in the community about preparing their advance directives. Now, what is an advance directive?
Thank you. What is an advance directive?
We offer people the opportunity to learn and to be prepared for the decisions they have to make before they die.
What are those decisions? What do you mean?
Well, I have a whole list of decisions that people need to make before they even do something called writing advance directives. What we used to do was get people together and say, okay, now you have to write your advance directives. What I've learned is that there are questions that you need to ask yourself before you even take a pen in hand. There are, and I can give you an example.
Yeah, please do.
For instance, are you a person who wants to take an active role in your health care? Some people say, just do whatever you need to do.
That's right.
But some people want to be involved or want their families to be involved. I have a list of 16 things here. I could choose. Here's another one. Do you want to live as long as possible, regardless of the quality of your life?
That's a great question. It's so provocative. And yeah, there's a focus, particularly in this country, about quantity, about everything. But certainly like, oh, I'm going to live as long as I possibly can. Well, you and I have both, we bear witness to folks who live a long life, but whose lives are not about quality. Can you elaborate on that? Quantity versus quality.
In my work, the best thing I can do to begin with is to try to be a good example of living what I consider to be a meaningful life. And that, for me, requires that I help other people. That's my mission. whether it's something I learned in religion or something I learned by observing how the world works. The more we help each other, the better we all are. And my favorite song is I'm Gonna Live Till I Die. It's a great song. I'm gonna laugh instead of cry. And when my number's up, I'm gonna fill my cup. I'm gonna live till I die. And I had no expectation that I would live as long as I have now. I'm 86 years old. And my parents died in their early 60s. Yeah. But I'm too busy right now
for death
to take the time.
So a reminder to those who have just joined us, I'm speaking with Barbara Sarah about programs that support and promote dying and death with dignity, grace, and preparation. So how do people in the community respond to you when you walk up to them and say, are you ready for your own dying and death? What happens?
I don't want to be this monster crawling in the streets and attacking people who are happily living. I take the opportunity as often as possible to go to community groups where people not only can hear my message, but can talk to each other and then hear what other people think about this and find the support within the community for taking up this subject, which many of us avoid for a long time. But it's coming. Yeah. Something's coming. I don't know what it is, but the song that has those words is very different. Something's coming, I don't know what it is, but it is gonna be great. Death is an opportunity to live as full a life as you can.
I so agree. One of the things that I've realized about my own personal sphere is that I have relatives who are really open to talking about dying and death. And then I have others who literally cannot say the word death. If I say something about death, they find all kinds of euphemisms or they walk out of the room, literally. What do you do about perhaps the dynamic of the patient who's embracing what you're sharing with them, what you're recommending, and then the family members who are just recalcitrant, avoiding, denying? What do you do with that dynamic?
There are many opportunities to bring up this subject because it's waiting for us all. But for instance, you also, just you used before the word pass. Person passed. I don't say people pass. To me, I pass or fail, but it's when I talk about death, I use the word death or end of life. I'm much more specific about it. Everybody passes.
The store, the road. I love that's like using the correct language. Is so empowering, right?
And I shall pass through this world but once. It's something that when I was a kid, there was something in my kitchen that my mother had that said, no matter. It was very optimistic. It said, anything I can do or any kindness I can show, let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. So passing is one, in our language now, we say someone passes, but it's a one-way street.
Yeah. So with all the knowledge that you have, what would you say to our listeners? What is the best way to begin to process death, dying and death, and ways to prepare for it? If you could put it in a package, if you would, and I know that's a very hard request, but what's the start of the process? You've already talked to your funeral director. Maybe that's the first step. What would you say to listeners?
I think most people are not ready to go to a funeral director yet, but they might be willing to talk to some friends, to have a conversation with a group of friends. Maybe you get together to do some activity and you say, hey, I listened to this person on the radio the other day and she was talking about death. Would you guys be willing to have a conversation about what you think about it or what you feel about it? Or you could find a death cafe. Like we have one here on the 18th of every month. You can call in. Or I run regular meetings about end of life at People's Place in Kingston.
Okay.
And I will go anywhere to go to a group of friends, to a mahjong club, to a men's tennis. I'll go anywhere to talk about it.
Excellent. And how do people begin to process these forms, these healthcare directives, healthcare proxies? There's a lot of words that I even find confusing. What do just some practical approaches? I'm sure they can glean some of this information through those resources you just mentioned, but maybe just put out words so that people can begin to process, oh, those are the forms I need to look for or think about.
Well, here's a form that you can all look for. It's called 5 Wishes. And on the cover of the 5 Wishes booklet, you can write down your wishes for the person you want to make your healthcare decisions for you, for the kind of medical treatment you want, for how comfortable you want to be. All of these things are in this wonderful project paper, and you can get it by going to 5wishes.org.
Excellent. Great.
And get it in the mail, or get a few of them and give them out to your friends.
Excellent. And I guess I want to point out to our audience, too, that you don't have to do this all at once.
Right.
Yes, there are people who are suddenly diagnosed with life-threatening diseases, and there's a certain amount of, there's a compunction to move quickly around this stuff. But for most of us, we are blessed with an opportunity to process this, speak to someone like Barbara Sarah about how to approach the paperwork, building community, finding words and language around this, and empowering yourself, but also your community to talk about this issue and move through it. Because as Barbara has pointed out, we are all going to go through it. We are all going to die. Yeah.
Yes. And I like to say to people that when they get it, that this is something worth talking about, I like to say, now you're an advocate for going out to your friends and your community and talk about what you just heard on the radio today. This lady talking about death on the radio. Hey, and she's still alive. And not to lose a sense of humor about, and thank you for laughing, because I do my best to I don't call it fun. I just call it having an attitude about living life as fully as possible until you can't anymore.
Barbara, I've heard you say, live well, die better.
That's my bumper sticker. It's on my car. And living well, what does living well mean to you? For some people, living well may not be what I consider living well. But find your way to live well and know that's going to help you as you age, and how you can enhance the quality of your life no matter what.
Yeah.
Even if you're confined to a bed or a wheelchair, how do you live well even in difficult circumstances?
I've been talking to my guests about pleasure, and I know that pleasure is not something that us women, vulva havers, have been asked over the centuries. And without using that word, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about finding pleasure even in small moments, small things, because that's hopefully something accessible to all human beings at a point in their lives.
I would be neglecting something if I didn't say that I welcome the opportunity to have this conversation, but also to invite people to look up circlehome.org. That is the name of our home, circlehome.org, because now we need more people to help us keep the doors of our free service, or a modestly priced service, to help people who cannot die in their own home, to give them a beautiful place to die. So we're looking for volunteers. We're looking for contributions to keep this program going. We have this beautiful house now, and we right now don't have any people in it because we need more volunteers or more funding to keep the doors open.
Great. I would also share or suggest that if you're a family member who's anticipating or participating in watching over a loved one as they die, that this is something, again, that can be so challenging and for some people feels really like something they can't do. But I think Barbara and I would agree that it is an incredible opportunity, and I will use the word gift, to be at the bedside of someone we care for.
Yes, and I do want to say that one of the things that I've become very aware of is how we don't learn, I think, early enough in our lives that our life is time limited. So I'm particularly interested, if anybody wants to join me, in putting together some material to give to children. Not just my fish died and my dog is sick.
Right.
But how do we live a life now knowing that it is going to end, and not it being a surprise when you're 18 and you find out that your grandparent died.
Yeah.
I believe we should do that sooner, help people learn about the fact that life is limited and how do you make the most of it.
It's paradoxical. It's because normalizing something that's so normal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Barbara, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and sharing your wisdom. And I hope that our listeners will tend to the resources that Barbara's provided to us today. There will also be information on our website at Radio Free Rhiniecliff. And please, thank you for listening to us today and joining me as we venture into the limitless conversations about our bodies and the world of health and healing and death. I'd love to hear from you. Please email your questions and comments to comments@radiofreerhiniecliff.org or call us at 845-307-7446. Please join me each episode. And if you like what you hear, subscribe and follow us on whatever podcast app you are listening on. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to my producers, Jen Hammoud and Matty Rosenberg. Until our next conversation, stay healthy, stand strong in your knowledge and intuition.
That was special.
Lovely to have you.